Come on into the ditch. I'm your resident ditch witch, Tara Tine, and we're about to get witchy, whether you like it or not. This evening, I am honoured to be joined by Dara Molloy, a Celtic monk, priest and druid who has been based on Inis Mór since 1985. He was ordained with the Maris priests in 1977 and was based in Dundalk for a number of years, where he worked a lot with youth groups, and he's very fondly remembered today even in the area. Dara officially left the Catholic Church in 1996 and has been practicing in the Celtic spiritual tradition ever since. In 2012, he co-founded Córcumann Fuinneamh Oileán Aran, a community-based organisation which promotes sustainability, energy efficiency and energy generation. And yes, he is available for weddings. Dara, it's brilliant to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's lovely to talk to you, Tara. I don't think you were even born when I was in Dundalk.
Round about that time. I'll not give too much away now, Dara, but
No.
Yeah, we didn't cross paths before.
Certainly
I'll
not.
put it
No,
that way.
no.
And I came across you through one of my Ditchaween videos, and some stories that had occurred in Dundalk that I found very, very interesting. And a lot of people from the town suggested that I should talk to you in relation to some of that stuff from that time. But we'll start at the beginning, Dara. I listened back to some of your podcasts and some other interviews that you've done when I was preparing for this interview. And what I noticed was you were talking a lot about how even as a child, you felt that spirituality was a big part of your life. How would you have experienced that in your daily life in your younger years? And would you have been aware of things like magic in the landscape?
I would say yes. First of all, I was reared, of course, by a very Roman Catholic family of parents who brought us to Mass every Sunday. And it was a big thing to be dressed properly and ready to go. And you had to have your prayer book with you when I was very small. And there were certain prayers we had off by heart. And also we were taught to say our prayers morning and evening by the side of our bed. And various other things like that. So, that would have been the context in which I grew up. And I think when I arrived at the age of around 12, I began to wonder, is this something I should dedicate my life to? Is like in my parents' eyes, it was extremely important. And at that time, every family in the country would have liked to have one of their sons to go on to be a priest, at least one, and perhaps a daughter to go on to be a nun, but more so a son to go on to be a priest. So that was the whole context. And I fitted that context. I was a sort of a serious young lad, very reflective and thoughtful. And at that age, when I was entering my teens, that was something I felt I had to decide. Either I'm going to live a more normal life, get married, have kids, and have a profession, or I'm going to become a priest, one or the other. Which am I going to do? So I suppose if you were to put a bet on, the chances were I was going to choose to become a priest, and that's exactly what I did. So that was at the age of 12, even though I told nobody at that time, not my parents nor anybody else. But in my mind, I was clear enough this was the path I was going to follow. And to sort of give expression to that, I started to go to Mass every day, which was something my father did anyway. From the time before I was born, he was going to Mass every day. And so I simply joined him in the car every morning. It took about a half an hour, a quick Mass, back home again, breakfast, and off to school. So that sort of became my routine. And then I ended up then joining the Maris and studying to be a priest.
So it was kind of, religion was sort of the gateway drug, if you will, for you.
Yeah, and I think you're asking me about the magic bit. I think my dad was probably more spiritually aware than my mother, even though both were very spiritual. And my dad used to take us out into the countryside quite a lot. Every Sunday for many, many years, we would go somewhere, and it'd be up to Dublin Mountains or out to a beach or to a river or somewhere out in the rural environment, and introduce us to nature. And I can remember feeling the magic of nature. He'd bring us off the road in through the fields, and we'd tramp across the cut grass, maybe of or the cut cereals of some oat field that had been harvested. And he would say, watch out now for the hares or for the rabbits or the birds or whatever it was. And that's when I used to feel the magic. So I'm not sure I connected that at the time with spirituality, because spirituality for me was the church and priests and saying prayers and things like that. But certainly I did experience the magic of nature at that time through my father, and actually through my grandfather, who would be on my mother's side, because he, when we'd visit him in the County Longford, he would also bring us out into nature, and he would help us to find the mushrooms, for example, or he would bring us out walking his dogs, and we'd be tramping through the fields again there too. So yeah, I think magic was very much part of my childhood in lots of ways.
And at what stage then would you have been aware of the church being sort of appearing to be outwardly averse to certain aspects of nature and magic, which when you really think about it seems like a bit of a contradiction, but a lot of us don't think about it for a very long time. At what point would you have started to kind of notice that the two were at odds, and how did you feel about that?
I would say it probably didn't really materialize in a conscious way into my mind until I came to live on the Aran Islands. So I was already in the Maris in Dundalk very unhappy. My outlet was working with young people, mainly through prayer groups and through the Charismatic Movement and through youth masses. And it was through those groups rather than through the school where I was teaching that led me to come to the Aran Islands on a visit. And then when I got here in 1982 for the first time with a group of young people from that prayer group, I realized this was a place I could come and live more like a monk, and a Celtic monk out in nature. And I suppose that's really when I began to think about spirituality and nature and began to see it as something that the church, the mainstream church, didn't really cater for, but it's something that I felt drawn to. And I saw that the Celtic tradition did cater for it. And that really drew me then out to the Aran Islands, where I think one of the attractions is that I'd be immersed in nature. I'd be immersed in all the elements, the earth and the air and the fire and the water, in a very concentrated way, because it's just a rock in the middle of the ocean, and you're fully exposed to all the weather at every time of the year. So that certainly began to attract me, but it probably attracted me intuitively at first. I didn't have everything worked out. I had no philosophy of the spirituality of nature or anything like that at the time, but I was just drawn towards it.
Did you start to find yourself then pulled into the world of the gods of our mythology and that?
Yes, and mainly by my contact with the locals here in the island when I came out to live here, because they were very connected with nature. And my next door neighbor, Tom Suddy, he helped me to learn how to produce my own food, which is a way to get connected with nature. I had never grown anything, not a flower, or I had cut the grass at home from my parents. That's about all. But he showed me how, in a way, growing potatoes in particular was a spiritual activity. Like, I remember when I first went to help him grow his potatoes, before I learned how to do it myself, I said, I'll apprentice myself to you now, and I'll be your helper, and you can teach me. So he had to get his donkey from the field, and we went up to his shed, which was beside his house. And we packed all the seed potatoes, which were lying there all through the winter, into a hessian bag. And before we tied the knot on the top of the bag, his wife came out with some holy water and sprinkled it onto the potatoes that were going to be planted. Then we tied the bag and put it onto the back of the donkey and walked the donkey down to the field. And then we started planting. And I remember that he told us, or other people told us, that there were certain women on the island who actually used to pray a prayer on every plant they put into the ground. And that really impressed me, that sense that there's something sacred going on here when you're planting. And of course it is magic, because you plant what appears to be like a half-dead potato that you mightn't even be that attracted to eat if you put it in a pot. But here you are putting it into the ground, and come back in a few weeks' time and it's begun to sprout, and something very fresh is growing out of it and coming up through the soil. And then it grows bigger and bigger. It's magic. It is really magic. And so, through that sort of being mentored by the local people, both the men and the women, into the spirituality of, if you like, the land and agriculture, that led me more and more deeply then into nature and seeing it as a sort of a source of the divine and a source of the spiritual.
So when you go way back then, you know, I'm sure you feel very connected living in a place like Inis Mór to, you know, ancient spirituality and say the likes of the early Christian monks. And I'm sure you find yourself thinking an awful lot about what they would have thought about things. Do you think that they would have believed in literal magic and literal gods and those kinds of things? Or were they just the people kind of recording them? You know, was it metaphor to them, or was it something that they really lived?
Well, I think if you look at the major thinkers of that time, there was a fellow called Pelagius, and then later on there was a fellow called John Scotus Erigena, and there were a few more. Now, Rome didn't like them. Rome condemned them and said what they were teaching was rubbish. In fact, they called it Irish porridge. That was their name for it, but it was a very derogatory name to call whatever they had written. But I've read some of their writing, and what they have said quite clearly is that no amount of our imagination will ever get us to the point where we can say we know what's going on and understand it. So they weren't at all fundamentalist or dogmatic. You know, they weren't saying, get out there and experience the magic and find something that's very concrete that you can believe in and talk about. They were more saying, no matter how much you exercise your imagination, you'll still be left short of what the real thing is. So certainly there is magic out there. They were certainly believers in that. In fact, I would say the focus of their lives was to live in such a way that they would experience the magic as much as they possibly could. They would immerse themselves in places which were magical, like the Aran Islands. Aran is certainly a magical place. I think lots of people experience that. Dundalk is a magical place. Skellig Michael off Kerry is a magical place. There are lots of other places that these monks chose to live in. And when you go and visit them, you see why. Because they are in Clonmacnoise, another amazing place on the River Shannon. Like, they were special places that had a very, very positive energy. And that's why the monks chose them, because they wanted to experience this every day. And that's, I'm teaching myself or trying to learn here how to live that way, how to experience it. My office, which I'm in at the moment, during the daytime, it looks out on our garden, and it's a fairly wild garden now. We grow our own vegetables there and so on. But we have some feeders for the birds. And every day I watch the birds, and they are magical, you know, and it takes my eye off my laptop for a while. And I just sit and I have my binoculars here, and I look out at the birds and try to identify them and watch their behavior. And I find it totally magical. And
before you know it, hours of your day have passed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then I go out for a walk in the afternoon before it gets dark as well. So I walk along the shore then, and I get to experience more magic out there.
Yeah. So when you were a kid, like, who would your role models have been?
Well, obviously my parents were. I think my teachers were. I didn't have that many inspirational models growing up that I can think of. I've had them in my adulthood, some really inspirational people. But growing up, you know, I remember in my primary school where my parents sent me to an all-Irish primary school in the middle of Dublin, 10 miles from where we lived. Like, you wouldn't do it today. Send a 6-year-old on a bus 10 miles into the city centre to go to school. You wouldn't do it today, but that's what we did. Now, mind you, my aunt was there to pick us up off the bus when we arrived, but still. But it was an all-Irish school. But for religion class, the teacher had got us to get a little booklet that was in English. And every page had a parable of Jesus in it. You know, the stories of Jesus, the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan, and all these other lovely, lovely stories that even a kid can understand. And those really fired me up. Those really inspired me, because even at that age, when I was maybe 9 or 10 years of age, those stories really appealed to me. And I could see there's some deep truth in what was being said in those stories. They really attracted me. So that's the best I can come up with at a young age, you know, where I suppose the only people I had around me that were influential were my parents and my teachers. But then later on, of course, as an adult, then I found other mentors that really inspired me. I don't know if you want me to go into that or not.
Yeah, well, tell us, like, who over the years would have really stuck out to you? Who would you identify with?
Well, Jesus has always been a great inspiration for me. I think I've lost a lot of the theology around him that the church has been teaching. But as a human being, he's for me the best by far. I find it absolutely amazing how, whatever teachings he taught, he never wrote anything down himself. So we only have a record of other people's memories of him, really, and they didn't start writing it down till long after death. So, I mean, how trustworthy is that? And yet, those stories in those 4 Gospels are so inspirational. Like, there must be some truth behind that they came from an amazing person. How else could they have been written? So I feel I do get a contact with him through the 4 Gospels in particular. And nobody really has matched his teaching since then that I can come up with. So he's certainly one that I would always go back to. But then I'm really attracted to John the Baptist, strangely enough. And he came before Jesus because he was, in a way, so fed up with his own society and how, in his view, it had gone down the wrong road, that he went out into the desert to the river Jordan. And there he decided he'd only eat the wild food that he could get out there, the honey and the locusts. And anybody who thought of coming out to see him, he would give them an earful about how everything was going wrong and how they needed to turn around and do things differently. So, and in a way, that's what I want to do in coming out of the Aran Islands. I wanted to go out.
How do I sign up for that job, Dara? Where do I apply?
Yeah, I want to come out onto the edge and, eat just local food here and be totally independent and non-reliant on the systems of the world and just shout, there's a different way we should be living. So in a way, he really fits me. And then later on, then I discovered a fellow called Ivan Illich, whom you probably know nothing about. But he was a great philosopher, and he used to be a Roman Catholic priest. So again, he was a bit like me, but he got into trouble with the church, and he decided he wouldn't practice his priesthood anymore. But his particular insight as a philosopher was to see how the church had managed to take on the message of Jesus and turn it upside down. His famous phrase was, it's in Latin, is corruptio optimi pessima. The corruption of the best is the worst. And that was in relation to Christianity. So while Jesus was the best, what we'd done with his message was the worst. So he was somebody that I got to know personally, and he certainly became my mentor. So he'd be a very important person in my life. And then I suppose at a more practical level, I was very inspired by a man called John Seymour, who's a Welsh man who began to teach, he older than me, but he began to teach how to live self-sufficiently. And he wrote this big tome of a book called the Self-Sufficiency Guidebook. Do you know it?
It's the Bible. It's the Bible.
You know it, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's a Bible, yeah. So he and his wife did that together. She did all the drawings. And so I got to know him personally as well. And he came out here quite a few times and we did conferences together and all that. So he would have been a great inspiration for me. I could go on. There's lots more in my adult life of people that have inspired me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how in the midst of all that, then I suppose I have to ask you, Dara, how did you end up in Dundalk?
Only because when I joined the Marists, study to be a priest, got ordained, you don't decide yourself what you're going to do. You get told by your boss what you're going to do. So once my studies were over and I was ordained, he said to me, I'm sending you now to Dundalk and you're going to teach in the school there. And at first I was attracted to that because I had studied education. I was interested in education. And I thought I could change the educational system. Ivan Illich, this man that I was talking about a while back, he was very critical of the education system, and I sided with his point of view. But I thought by going into a school, I could do something about it. So I was quite enthusiastic. And it wasn't until a few years into it that I realized, heck, this system is so entrenched in Ireland that nobody is going to change it at ground level. You'll have to change it. You'd have to become get to the very top of the political system. And even then you might be able to change it, as has proven to be the case. Yeah. Because as some of the people who knew me in Dundalk will know, I started a campaign against the education system after I finished teaching in Dundalk. And I did it for 10 years. I kept going every year for 10 years around the Leaving Cert time. And now I have a daughter who's sitting the Leaving Cert this year. And I'm looking at her and saying, the system is just as bad as ever. She hates every minute of it. And she feels bullied and abused. And I totally agree with her. The system is sick. Yeah. And it hasn't changed a bit in all the years.
I might have to have you on for a part 2 interview to talk just about that, Dara. I fully agree with you.
There you are. I'm glad to hear you guys agree with me.
I think we both.
Yeah, no, and I didn't send my kids to school. I have 4 kids, and they're all. The youngest now is doing her Leaving Cert, so they've all passed through that stage. But for the other 3, they didn't go to school at all until they were 15, 16. They just went to do their Leaving Cert, get in and get out, which they did, and they all did reasonably well. But unfortunately, the youngest one, she wasn't going to be left behind when her 3 older siblings had gone to school. So she went to school at the age of 11. She didn't go at the age of 4. She went at the age of 11. And so she's had a long stint of being in secondary school. And I think she regrets every minute of it that she chose to go, because she could have stayed out had she wanted to. But
yeah. So while you were, jumping back then to earlier in your career, before you had a family and you were working with young people as part of your work in the parish, you ended up involved with the Charismatic Movement and doing a lot of work with that. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, the Charismatic Movement, in a way, was a lifesaver for me, as was Taizé. If you've heard about Taizé in France, do you know that?
No. The
Little Brothers, I don't know what they call themselves, but anyway, it's a monastery in France which is non-denominational. It's Christian, but it's non-denominational. And at that time, it was a very, very attractive place for young adults. And so between the Charismatic Movement and the Taizé movement, spirituality became alive for many, many people in Dundalk. Like, these are people like myself, go to Mass, say your prayers, go home again. And in a way, there's no emotion in it. People don't get moved normally when they went to Mass. I don't think they get moved now either. They go to Mass, as far as I can make out. Maybe in Africa or places like that, liturgical celebrations can be very happy occasions and people can be dancing and singing and expressing their emotions, but not in Ireland.
Yeah, not everyone does it like the straight-laced Irish Catholics.
No, yeah, the Sunday Mass in Ireland was a very sober affair. But the Charismatic Movement brought warmth and emotion into your spiritual life. And, we would gather for a prayer meeting, say, in the Mercy Convent in Dundalk on a Wednesday night, and it could have up to 100 people at it. And we would start with some singing, and then we would go into what we call praise, which is sort of spontaneous chanting. You make up your own sounds and you make up your own. You don't use English words, though you could use English words, but a lot of the time you're just making sounds and chanting. And it's amazing how when everybody does that, you actually do it in harmony to each other. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like a choir. It's very moving. It catches your emotions and your feelings, which Mass never did. So after a year or two of the Charismatic Movement among adults in Dundalk, we decided to start a youth group as well. And that really attracted the youth too, because they began to feel the emotion of spirituality as well. And that movement got very big until it got so big we couldn't handle it really. So the Charismatic Movement was great for me, but it was also great for a lot of people who got involved in it at that time. Now, it was a big wave of popularity. It went through a wave of popularity and then it receded again. So it's not anything like as strong today as it was, obviously.
Yeah. And then I suppose the next thing that happened when you're awakening a load of young people towards their spirituality, and of course, it's not all love, light and happiness. And then, you would have been in the wake of the movie The Exorcist having been released a few years beforehand. And then we sort of had a wave of what would probably be referred to as Satanic Panic here in Dundalk. So it's some people just think it's a board game, and it's just a thing moving around a board, and there's probably someone pushing it, and it's all tricks. But to some people, especially young people in Dundalk around that time and other places where this has kind of manifested, it's a very real and a very serious thing. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of what it was like when all of that started happening in town?
I can, yeah. It wouldn't have started with Ouija boards. It would have started in the Charismatic Movement itself, because part of the Charismatic Movement, part of what we did in it was we prayed with people and we prayed over people. And some people were quite troubled. And often when you pray over them, they would react to it, or they would twist up in a ball. Some of them would even lie down on the ground and squirm. And we had to find a way to understand that and to interpret it. And we used simply the scriptures as an interpretation. So it was the work of the devil. That's how we interpreted it. And our job was to try and get the devil out of that person. So there was a sort of an element of exorcism going on as part of the Charismatic Movement. So that's then, I suppose, when young people then foolishly maybe got attracted to playing with the Ouija board, it was in the air, if you like, because of the Charismatic Movement. This whole idea of Satanism and the devil and so on, it was all in the air. And so young people will, because they're young people, will experiment and will do things which are quite dangerous and will take risks because that's what they do. And so we discovered that there was a sort of a fad among young people to use Ouija boards and to have these sessions. And so that's really how that began to happen. And then because I was involved in the Charismatic Movement, when young people got into trouble with this, I was one of the people they approached. And there's one particular case then which was quite difficult to deal with, but it was to do with Ouija boards, and it was to do with that this girl had been at one of these sessions and had, I think, become quite frightened. And when she came home to her house, she felt that this evil spirit followed her into the house, and then it wouldn't leave. And I remember her describing it to me that the more afraid she got, the bigger it appeared to be. And the more calmed down she got and confident that she could deal with it, the less it became. But still, she didn't get rid of it. And she went to the parish priest first, who wasn't involved in the Charismatic Movement. And he sent her to the bishop, and the bishop sent her to the chief exorcist of Ireland, who happened to be the professor of psychology in University College Dublin, a priest, but professor of psychology. I had him myself in college when I was studying to be a priest. And he sat her down, I think, with her mother, and he more or less told her it was all nonsense. And that I don't know if he gave her any particular thing to do, but he certainly wasn't going to use holy water and a crucifix to get rid of it for her. He didn't do any of that. He more or less told her it was nonsense to go home and have a bit of sense. So that didn't work. So when she came to me then, I felt we probably had to do a ritual. And I have since come to believe much more in the power of ritual, even than then. And so a ritual would be where you try to, you're addressing something that's in a way beyond your intellect. So you're not trying to understand it, but you're trying to deal with it. And so we did use the sort of traditional things which one does as a priest when one is dealing with these types of situations, which was holy water and a crucifix. I did use all of that. And I did say some prayers. And I can't honestly say if that did the trick or not at the time. But I do know that about 2 years later, I had moved out to live in the Aran Islands, and the young girl was now turning 20 or something like that. And she was out visiting the island, and she came and visited me, and she said everything is now fine. So it did clear over time. And obviously, because she called to find me, she was more or less recognizing that I had something to do with clearing it. So maybe the ritual did do something to clear it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you ever read Terry Pratchett?
He's in the house here.
Yeah.
My kids have read him, but I personally haven't.
There's a concept that Pratchett comes back to time and again that is basically the main method that one of the main witches would use throughout the series, and it's called Headology. So it goes like a step further than psychology, where it's, as you say, taking things that are sort of beyond the ken of your conscious mind and coming up with a beyond the conscious solution of dealing with that, and that it has to be tailored to the individual and, you know, exactly what it is that they need. So that would also, you know, when we talk about things like exorcisms, that would be my understanding of it too. Although, you know, at the same time, you'd never take a chance when the devil's involved either. You know, I always have a set of rosary beads around the place somewhere just in case.
No, you're wise, because I mean, I've been thinking about these sort of things a lot because I've been writing a book which is just ready now to publish. And, you know, what I'm saying in the book is that we live in a universe that's far, far beyond us. Like, you just have to look at the size of the universe or the age of the universe and our little appearance in it. You know, one way of describing it is that the universe, if the whole amount of time that the universe is in existence was 24 hours, we arrived in the last second. You know, so, and that's not just a measure of how much bigger it is than us, but it's also a measure of how little we know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and how little we will ever know, no matter how good our scientists are. And one of the ways I've come to try and get to grips with that is to say, whenever I feel a sense of wonder or magic or mystery or anything in a way that's beyond me, you know, the way people say all the time, that's incredible. You know, people use it all the time in conversation. It's incredible. That's an expression of you experiencing something that's beyond you. And that's my way into spirituality nowadays, is to find the experience of something beyond me. I don't have to understand it, because I realize now that I'm much older, I'm never going to understand it. I don't have to understand it. I just have to experience it. And then I can say, wow, or I can say, oh, that's incredible, or that's amazing, or whatever it is. I get such delight out of our two dogs. I get delight out of the birds in the garden. I get delight out of the flowers that come on the trees. I get the delight out of a storm. You know, all this stuff is around us, and it's amazing and it's magical, and we will never fully understand it. And one scientist said it quite clearly, a fellow called Max Planck. I quote him in my book. That's how I can remember him today. He says, we will never understand the mystery because we're part of the mystery. So you'll never be able to stand outside it and look at it, because you're right in there in the middle of it. You're part of it. So for me, more and more, magic is what it's all about. And I suppose at the same time, you know, we have to watch out for the sources of evil in that whole mix, because we don't understand that either. And there's no doubt there's a lot of evil in the world. There's a lot of nasty things happening.
And our human moral code is so limited as well that, you know, it makes us kind of makes it hard for us to imagine when we realize that it's not all love, light and laughter, you know, how far the other way it can go as well, you know. Absolutely. It's I mean, it's gruesome to watch what's going on in some parts of the world, and it was going on here too, and it does go on here. You know, people are murdering themselves in Ireland as well, and lots of other evil going on, and a lot of it only comes to light years after it's happened, like all the evil that was going on inside the church even itself, you know, that we knew nothing about. And now it's all being revealed, or maybe it's not all being revealed. Maybe only some of it is being revealed. Tip of the iceberg, I'm willing to bet.
Could be only tip of the iceberg, exactly, yeah.
So would it be safe to assume that it would be a combination of those hypocrisies, really, and also your experiences with the supernatural or the extra natural, if you wanna, that would have sort of influenced your path away from the church?
Well, you see, since I was young, I've been on a spiritual journey, and I've been searching for answers. I've been searching for the truth. I've been searching for a way to live. I've been searching for who I am and what's the right work for me to be doing and all of that. And it's like I found the church to be a structure into which I could maybe explore these issues. And then after a number of years in the church, I found it was becoming a box that was enclosing me and squeezing me and squashing me and suffocating me. I was moving and growing, but the church wasn't. In fact, if anything, the church was retracting and getting more and more dogmatic. So eventually I said, I'm going to have to, first of all, I said, I'm going to have to escape out to the edge of it, which brought me out here to the Aran Islands. I was still a Catholic priest out here. So I said, maybe I'd survive out at the edge of it, not in the middle of it. But I found I couldn't even survive with that. So that's when in 1996, I was living here 11 years at that time. I had to leave it altogether because the values that it was standing for, in fact, regardless of whatever they said, I mean, often the church says lovely things. But if you look at its structure, it's hierarchical. And it's not democratically hierarchical. Like it's got, in a way, a dictator at the top. So, you know, where in the Gospels of Jesus do you find that was his preferred way of doing things?
Yeah.
Definitely not. You know, it's hierarchical, it's authoritarian, it's patriarchal, it excludes women, it condemns homosexuals. It just goes on and on and on. And I said, I can't be the public face of this. I don't agree with these things anymore. You know, so I'm not going to stand up in a church and say, I represent this church which proclaims these values. I couldn't do it. So I moved on and the church didn't, is what really I feel has happened.
Yeah.
But also, you know, the Celtic monks and the whole Celtic spiritual tradition, which, by the way, goes back much further than Christianity. I found a lot of richness in that because, you know, you're asking me about the gods and goddesses. You know, maybe people at that time did believe in them as facts. I don't know. The god Lu, who was the god of the sun, the god Manannán, the god of the sea. I don't know if they believed that they were actual real beings or if they were or if they just acknowledged them as creations of their imagination and the best way they could describe something that they were experiencing. You know, because certainly these people live their spiritual lives with an emphasis on their experience, not on any dogmatic teachings. That definitely is the case. So I doubt if they were very dogmatic about their beliefs, but more used them as a sort of way of talking about their experience. You know, I do get an experience of the divine from the ocean. Every day it's different. Today, you know, every day we walk past it, I walk with my wife, the tide is at a different place. It's either full in or full out or halfway in or halfway out. The beach has got seaweed thrown on it or it doesn't have seaweed thrown on it. The waves are big or they're not big, they're small, or, you know, it's blue or it's gray or it's green. I mean, every day it's different. It's extraordinary, you know, so, and that's just the sea. So you can easily imagine how there's a sort of a powerful divine energy behind all of that. And let's give that divine energy a name and let's call it the god Manannán. I have no problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah. You have me right there. I'm standing on the edge of Dún looking
exactly.
Out over
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. And you can do the same with the sun and you can do the same with the seasons. You can find an energy in them that you can sort of want to talk about. And once you do, maybe you want to personify it and give it a name, which is an easy enough thing to do. And it makes it easy to talk about it then.
And talk to it as well.
Talk to it, exactly, yeah. Without becoming fundamentalist about it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think they ever did become fundamentalist about it.
Yeah, it wouldn't really suit our soul, would it, Dara?
No.
We tried
and
it didn't suit us.
Yeah. Like these Celtic monks, they went back into Europe, as you probably know, because the Irish monks traveled all over Europe, and they were appalled at the behavior of the bishops and the priests and the church in Europe, which wasn't influenced by this Celtic tradition. Because for them, the way to get in touch with the spiritual aspect of your life is how you live your life. You know, So they would live a very simple life, and they'd live it out in the countryside because then you're close to nature. And by living a simple life, you're not distracted by riches or by power or by politics or by wealth or anything like that. So that's how they were living. And they felt anybody who's on a spiritual path needs to live like that. And they're probably right. So they saw these bishops living in palaces and dressed like kings and being called my lord and having their ring kissed on their finger. It's all rubbish, and they couldn't cope with it at all. So they condemned the bishops, and that, of course, got them into trouble. But yeah, so I'm very attracted towards what those monks stood for, but I'm not at all attracted to what the Roman Church was standing for.
And I suppose before we leave the church behind, what did you think about their very sort of recent decision? I think it was 2009 they shut it down. The closing up the loophole on defecting from the church. Did you take that as kind of seriously and literally as I and a lot of other people did? It's
very, very cynical. I mean, I actually mentioned it in this book that I'm publishing. I mentioned that actually, because it's very cynical. Up until that point, people could actually renounce their baptism and no longer be a member of the church officially. I mean, you're made a member when you have no choice in the matter as a tiny baby. And they regard you as a member from then on, and your name is in a baptismal book, and they can't take you off it. And this loophole where they allowed you to renounce it, they have removed it. So it's very cynical, and it's just another nail in their coffin, So it's not doing them any favors.
I've heard that somebody did it again recently using the same template. I'm sure you heard of that Count Me Out website, which I think was possibly actually, I don't know if the two are linked, but it's an awful big coincidence if they're not. I think that website started up in Ireland and tens of thousands of people defected from the church. And then the canon law was changed to say that you couldn't defect from the church anymore. But I recently saw that a guy had done it. So I don't know if they're still being incredibly staunch on it, but I viewers may remember me mentioning on the channel before that I was on Facebook, I think, talking about this in a comment thread one day, and a man who wanted to be a Buddhist monk. He was almost finished his training to be a Buddhist monk, but the time was coming where he had to dedicate his soul to Buddha, and in order to do that, his soul couldn't belong to another god, so he wanted to defect from the church, but it was just after that loophole was closed. And I really felt for this man. He was in spiritual turmoil because he wanted his soul back. He didn't agree to give it away in the first place, and he'd found a path that really worked for him, and he felt like he couldn't fully dedicate himself to it while his name was still in the Catholic records being used to bump up this other church that he didn't agree with at all.
Yeah, well, I don't believe in giving my power to anybody. And when I was leaving the church, I knew that one of the church's ways of dealing with somebody like me is to excommunicate them. So I said, well, if you can do that, I can do that. So I excommunicated the church from my life. And,
nice power play. I like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I never bothered. I many of my priest friends who left the church and the religious life wanted to get dispensation from the church then, and they wanted to get released from their vows as a priest and all of that stuff. I didn't go for any of that. I released myself from all these vows. And, if they want to keep my name on a book somewhere, I don't care. But I'm not a member anymore, and I'm clear of them. So I think we have power within ourselves, and we should be very slow to give that power away to somebody else, even if we call it Buddha or somebody like that, And it's a power that is rightfully ours. It's not like political power where you can use it to oppress other people or abuse people. This is your own power. You were born with it. And because you're a unique person born into the world, you have a unique destiny, and nobody else can tell you what that destiny is. You have to find it for yourself. And therefore you need that power to make those decisions for yourself and not allow anybody else make decisions for you on your behalf, because that's what the church tried to do. They tried to control people's beliefs and therefore people's behavior. And that's what was so wrong about it. We each have a personal destiny, and part of your spiritual life is discovering that path for yourself, discovering who you really are, discovering what your calling is and what you're meant to do with your life in the world, and then live it to the best of your ability. That's what you have to do, and that's your power, and nobody should take that from you.
So since you've discovered kind of magic really and started becoming like deepening your connection with it, do you prefer to kind of remain the passive sort of tour guide with it, or are you ever tempted to get stuck in and start undoing curses and that? I think it was St. Columba I read was up to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'll tell you a few different aspects of that. First of all, I believe that there is magic that, in a way, I'm not saying I can perform it, although in another way I can, but everybody can. I think there is a deeper connection between us all. And I don't just mean humans. I mean, there's a deeper connection between everything than most of us realize. And if we can tune into that, it's like a deep wavelength that you can tune into. And when you tune into it, you can bypass the limitations of space and time, and you can communicate at a deep level. And I've seen proof of that recently in a woman who showed how she could communicate with a leopard. It was a leopard, I think it was a leopard, an animal who was very, very angry and was kept in a zoo. And she managed to talk to it and find out what was going on. And she calmed it down, and it became a very pleasant animal as a result. So she sort of proved the point to me that we have this power, and that means that. And I find these stories in among the Irish saints as well, by the way, that they were able to do this. They were able to communicate to each other over thousands of miles. Somehow they knew. Somehow Columbanus knew that Saint Gall was dying way back in Switzerland. Columbanus was down in northern Italy, but he knew that St. Gall was dying, and he had fallen out at them. They'd had a row. So he sent a messenger the whole way across the Alps back to Switzerland to give Gall his staff, Columbanus' staff, as a sign of reconciliation. So they were reconciled before Gall died. And there's lots of other examples of that among the Irish saints who had a sense of what was going on for somebody else many, many miles away and could send a message by magic, if you like, to them, or communication, that sort of way. So, and that has worked many a time for me as well. So when I think of somebody now, if I have a thought, if they enter my mind, if you like, rather than me thinking of them, if somebody enters my mind and I focus on their presence in my mind, sometimes I can get an intuition of what's going on for them right now. And it might lead me to light a candle for them or to contact them or something like that. So there's a bit of magic going on there. So that's at a personal level. And I think we're all able to do that. We can develop it. But secondly, reversing curses, as you say. Yet the great thing about the Irish saints, and I love them for this, is that any of them who are powerful enough to work a miracle were also powerful enough to curse. And most of them did. So it was a very bad idea to to make one of these saints angry. Even stories about St. Patrick, he was coming down a hill one day with some of his friends, and they were really hungry, as you would be if you'd been climbing a mountain. And he saw a boat coming in along the shore. And he said, we'll go down to these lads now, we'll see if they have a few fish, and maybe we'll get a feed. So they go down to him anyway, and down to the boat, and the boat fellas see them coming. And the boat fellas are talking among themselves as well. And they say, with these feckers coming here now, they'll be asking us for some of our fish. We'll tell them we have none.
Yeah.
They had fish, but they were going to tell them we had none. So that's what happens anyway. Patrick asked for the fish and they say they have none. And Patrick says to them, well, if you have no fish in your boat, from now on, every time you go fishing, you'll catch more than you need. But if you have fish in your boat and you're just not giving them to us, every time you go out into this bay from now on, you'll never catch another fish. And apparently there's some bay up in Donegal which has never had a fish caught in it since then. And we have a similar problem here on the Aran Islands because St. Columba or Columkill came to visit when he was a young monk. And Enda was the abbot here, and Enda was from Dundalk. Did you know that, St. Enda?
No, I didn't know that.
He was the abbot here. Yeah, he was from Dundalk. He was the Prince of Oriel, and Oriel, of course, is Dundalk, Oriel Park. Yeah, he was the son of the King of Oriel, and he was a monk, and he came out here to set up a lot of monasteries. He was amazing what he did. Like, he's the patriarch of Irish monasticism. Anyway, he became very famous out here, and everybody who wanted to be a monk had to come and visit St. Enda. And normally you got the hospitality. You were looked after in the guest house, and you were fed, and that was part of the rule of being a monk, was to be hospitable. But when Columba arrived out here, Enda recognised him and knew that he was the prince of the O'Neills up in Northern Ireland, in Ulster. And the O'Neills were one of the most powerful kingdoms of the northern half of Ireland. Ireland was divided into two halves, and you had one main sort of high king of the northern half, which were the O'Neills, and you had one main king of the southern half, which was a fellow called Angus at the time. So anyway, Enda was a bit suspicious that if he welcomed Columkill out here, and let him set up a little hermitage for himself and so on, that all the monks would be attracted to him rather than to Enda, and that Columkill would take over the whole show. Mm. And Enda was having none of it. So there was a bit of a row, and Enda pushed him off a rock, and he fell on the ground below, and I can show you the marks of his ribs on the rock as a result. And he left him there, and Columkill had to head off with his tail between his legs, and there was no boat for him, so he sat on this rock, and the rock floated out to sea. And we call it today Columkill's boat. And there's various versions of the boat all along the Connemara coast, and we have one here too. And I can show it to you. It looks exactly like a boat, but it's a rock. And when Columkill was floated off out into the sea, he was very, very angry, very hurt, and very upset. And he didn't experience the hospitality which he should have experienced. So he cursed the island. And he, being probably the most powerful saint we ever produced, maybe unless you say St. Bridget was more powerful, the two are both about equal. He's certainly one of the greatest. His curses were pretty powerful, and he cursed us 3 times. He said there'll be no fuel on that island to burn in your fire. You'll have no trees or anything like that, no turf, nothing like that. You'll have to eat raw food, which apparently the monks used to do out here. So that was the first curse. And the second one was there'll be no soil on the ground. You'll have nothing. You'll have no land at all. It'll be all just bare rock. And if you come out and visit here, that's the case. Any land we have, we've had to make it out of sand and seaweed brought up from the shore. Yeah. And I still do that myself. And the third curse then, his rage was so bad, he turned around 3 different times and cursed us. So it's major cursing going on. The third curse was that we'd be ruled all the time by outsiders who didn't really live here at all, which is actually our history. The land was owned, the islands were owned by people who lived either in England or up in County Meath or in some nice fertile farming land in Ireland, but they never lived out here. They just collected the rent off us and had agents do that for them, So we have been ruled by outsiders. So those curses really did stick home. And one of the ways I decided, the end of that story is that these curses will not be reversed unless somebody comes along who's greater and more powerful than St. Columkill. So that sort of rules us all out, I think. Who's going to be greater than Columkill?
I was going to say, did you ever give it a go? Did you go out again the astral plane?
No, I wouldn't presume. I wouldn't presume to do that. But here's the trick. I did discover the trick. The trick is for us all to join together. And together as a community, we'll reverse the curse. And we're doing that. So, for example, we set up a recycling plant here on the island, and that takes all our waste. And every family has to collect all their kitchen waste, which is organic waste, like potato peels and all that sort of stuff. And it's sent down to the recycling plant. They put it into a big composter. They heat it up to a high temperature so that it's purified of all things that shouldn't be in it. And it turns eventually into soil. And they sell it in big bags. You can buy a ton of it for €50 or something. And it's fantastic for your garden. I have 2 tons of it outside at the moment in a bag. So we're getting our soil. That's that curse being got rid of, right? And the next one then is what's next? The energy, the fuel for the fire. So the energy co-op is doing that. We're beginning to tap the energy of the wind and the sun and so on, the waves, and we're going to have our own energy, and that'll get rid of that curse. And then the third one, being ruled by outsiders, well, you get rid of that curse by everybody here pulling together, getting our act together and taking control of our lives here in the island, which we're doing. So we're getting there.
I think I might have to come and join your community there, Dara. It sounds completely idyllic. It's like my actual ideal life. You lived as a hermit monk for 10 years. And
yeah,
I'm not lying when I say that is my dream job, or one of them at least anyway. And things these days sort of do seem to be shifting away from materialism. I think there's probably a lot of people watching this who would like the same thing. And I think especially in the last couple of years, there's a lot more of us thinking about just getting away from it all. But what advice would you give to young people who feel that they want to devote themselves to a life of lived spirituality, or at least give it a go, but who can't afford to travel or move to their place of resurrection, as you call it, and who don't want to join the church?
Well, when I was studying in college, I was already a seminarian at the time. I was studying psychology and computer science. And there was one lad in college, and he told me after the summer that he had spent the whole summer wandering across Europe. And I said, how did you manage that? But he said, I just brought one change of clothes. I think I'm not quite accurate in this, but it's a very, very, very simple way of living. He brought one change of clothes. And I said, how did you manage for a towel or things like that? He said, I brought a tea cloth from the kitchen, and I used that. He says, what you do with the tea cloth to dry yourself down is you dry yourself down and squeeze it out, and then you just dry it on the outside of your knapsack while you're traveling. And I said, what'd you do for money? Well, he said, I just got odd jobs here and there. I just worked, basic wage here and there where people needed me, and then I travel on again, and that's what he did. And it just showed me that it's possible to do these things. If you don't have a family and you're not having other people dependent on you, like I now have to earn for 6 people here until all my kids are fully independent. They're getting there slowly. So it's different. But when I was on my own as a hermit, you live on virtually nothing, especially if you're growing your own food, or if you're happy to live very simply. Like I lived in a wooden hut, which cost me, I think, £300 at the time. This is punts before euros, right? So it's a garden hut that you could buy in sections. It came out on the boat, and I got it brought up by a tractor, and then you just nail it or screw it together yourself. And then I found bits and pieces of insulation, put it inside it. I broke up some pallets, and I used the wood from the pallets to create an inner wall as well as an outer wall. Somebody helped me get a stove. I think they might have even bought the stove for me, a tiny stove. We put it into it. I eventually ran even electricity into it, but it was only 10 feet by 8 feet. Like it's about the size of this little room I'm in now. It was tiny. I put pallets on the floor, and eventually I think I got a mattress, but for years I think I slept on the floor. These things didn't bother me at all, especially when you're young. Things like that don't bother you. I mean, young people today will sleep on the floor any day. They go to a party some night in a house. They won't come home. There isn't a bed for everybody. They'll sleep on the floor. They'll sleep anywhere. So I would encourage young people to have that sort of carefree approach when they finish their education, or even taking a break from education, and just go off. And, you need a minimum amount of money, and just trust that life will provide you with what you need, and just go for the higher things. Go for what you need to learn. Go for the inspirational person that's out there somewhere that you'd like to meet. Go for the places that you really want to see, or the experiences that you really want to have. Just go for it when you're young, because if you wait till you're older, there's a lot of ties on you that are going to tie you down and not allow you to do these things. So do them when you're young, and use it. And many young people do this without actually consciously knowing that it's a spiritual journey they're on. But I suppose if you consciously decide it's a spiritual journey, you get far more out of it. If you consciously decide this is my journey into exile, I'm going to leave everything behind. I'm going to just explore the world. I'm going to just allow the spirit to guide me. I just go follow my intuition, follow my nose. And I'm not going to allow fear dictate to me where I go or what I do. I'm going to try and allow my passion or my interest or my inner positive energies to guide me in where I go and what I do. And through that, you'll eventually find who you really are, and eventually find what you're really meant to do with your life. And if you come home at all, you'll come home totally inspired and a changed person. And then you know what you got to do with your life. So now you have a focus. And that was me. I didn't find my focus until I found the Aran Islands. Then I found my focus. And then I knew what my life was about. And I knew who I was eventually. You think you know who you were. I was 35 when I discovered who I was. So it took me that length of time. And who knows when you'll actually find out who you are. And these Celtic monks, when they were wandering Europe, that's what they were doing. They were trying to find out who they were as well. And many of them didn't have a clue. They wandered all over Europe, and they kept wandering because they didn't find out who they were. And maybe at a certain point then the penny dropped. And now they're famous in that place. If you go and visit some places in Europe, you'll find an Irish monk lived there and he's very famous. They still remember him, There's streets called after him, or a church called after him, or there was a statue of him or something, And that happened 1,500 years ago and they still remember him.
And if your daughter said she was going to go off now traveling when she's done her leaving cert, would you support her to do that?
Oh, absolutely. I have a daughter coming home from Portugal tomorrow. She's going to arrive here tomorrow. She's already in Galway tonight. And she and her sister, who are twins, went off to the Azores Islands. Have you ever been to the Azores?
No,
I haven't. I never even knew where they existed. There you are. Well, they worked all summer here, and so they had some money, and they said, we're going to go off now and just do some things that are completely new for us to do. So they both went off to the Azores. In fact, they were so excited about going that lots of their friends went with them, and they all had a ball. They stayed there for a month in Airbnbs. And then one of my daughters came back after the month, and the other daughter is only coming home tomorrow morning because she stayed on in Portugal for another 2 weeks. So, and that same daughter has already climbed Mount Everest. These are 22-year-old girls. So that daughter has climbed Mount Everest, not to the very top, to the base camp. But she's done it at the age of probably about 20. And her sister, the other twin, has been to India for a month and come back as a qualified yoga teacher. So these girls are getting out there, and I encourage them to get out there.
Yeah.
That's how they find themselves.
So to young people sort of who are finding it hard to find their place in the world, or find something that gives them a sense of meaning and fulfillment, trust in your instincts, you would say, is a big part.
Trust in your instincts to get out there. There's a source of energy deep inside you. Maybe you already have a sense of what it is, or maybe you haven't opened those doors to it yet. But wherever you're at, get out there and find it, because there is a source of energy deep within you. And when you find it, you find out who you are and you find out what your life's about. And then you just go and do it.
Yeah. Another man I know who did that. And just whenever you mentioned sustainability, I was wondering, have you met Mark Boylan on Chalk's Hair yet?
I haven't met him personally, but I do know of him. And I've come in touch with people who know him well, because he's based in Galway.
Yes.
So, yeah.
That's what I thought. So he's your neighbour. It's a great spot.
Yeah.
I did it. I helped him do a wee bit of building on the place. I wanted to learn about working with cob and the wattle and dub and all that. That's where my instincts led me, Dara.
Good for you.
I think a lot of people get led down that way these days. Mark's great.
Yeah, like the houses we have a house that we built to call it our project house, which is for all the volunteers who had been living with us. And we built this house with their help and for them. So that's a house that's built with local materials. And then when I started having a family, I turned my little hermit shed into one of the rooms of our house. And it sort of grew organically, and we built it all ourselves, and it got some help from people along the way. So yeah, I'm very, very much into that whole thing of self-sufficiency, and you can live with very, very little money. I proved
once you get the land, says you, Dara. It's a lot harder to get it these days, I think, than it was then.
I had no land when I came here first, and I lived without any land for the first 10 or 11 years because I just rented a house and rented a place. But then I approached the neighbour, and he said, no, I won't give it to you. And I left it for a year, and I approached him a second time, and he had changed his mind. He said, oh yeah, I'll give it to you now. And whatever price he gave me, it was almost exactly what I had. So when I gave it to him, I had no money left to do anything with the land or build a house or anything. And we just looked around and said, well, the land has an old cottage on it, so let's knock down the cottage and collect all the stones, and we'd start building the house with the stones. So that's what we did. And we used local sand, and we ended up using local thatch, and we got recycled windows, recycled doors. We went to merchants in Galway builders, providers. And we said, do you have any, you probably have a pile of timber out there that's a whole mix of all sorts of stuff that's just leftovers. Any chance we could buy a load of that off you? And they started giving it to us for next to nothing. And we had piles of timber outside, and we used it to make doors and to put down floors and do everything we needed with it. So that's how we did it.
You taking notes, Dave?
Oh, yeah.
And if you had told me in advance how we could do it, I wouldn't have been able to tell you how we could do it, because I didn't think I could do it. But just we did it one step at a time, one day at a time, and it happened. I'm
currently on a hunt for my place of resurrection, Dara. If you hear of it coming up around the 20k mark, give us a shout, will you please? It'll not buy me much, I don't think, but we're going to try it anyway.
You've got to believe in it, and then.
So I come down and stay in your house when I'm looking.
Exactly. Yeah. No, imagine it happening, and then gradually move towards it happening. Yeah. Just believe it's all going to work out, and it will.
Well, I have a really hard question for you now, just before we let you go, Dara.
Okay.
Solstice or Christmas?
Mm-hmm.
Which do you prefer?
Oh, it's definitely solstice. No, it's definitely solstice. Yeah. And then I would sort of stitch the Christmas celebrations onto that. But solstice is the root of the whole thing. Absolutely. Solstice it is. Yeah. It's the time when the sun is at its lowest. It's the shortest day in the year. And it holds such promise of the day after. Do you know what I mean? That the sun is going to begin to get higher. The days are going to begin to get longer. Everything is going to start moving towards reviving and growing again. All the things under the ground are going to be juggling around there, just dying to get going again. And the buds around the trees and the animals out in the fields are pregnant with new life. And it's a magical, absolutely magical time.
Yeah. So you log on to go.
Yeah. The Christmas activity, the Christmas festivities will add to it. But the actual thing itself is the solstice, definitely.
Well, Dara, look, it's been most illuminating and so enjoyable talking to you. I really, really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome, Tara, and lovely to talk to you too.
And to you, I think we might need to get your wife on at some point too. I read that she's written on Jungian psychology, so she's a woman after my own heart.
Good, yeah, she has, yeah, she has. She's an expert on it, and she's in that sense, she's my mentor in terms of what's going on in my head and trying to understand my dreams and understanding my personality. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. My dominant function is thinking. I'm a pretty poor feeler. All these things I've learned from her, and she's learned them from Jung. So
yes,
yeah. You could get around
to put in a good word there for me, will you?
I will, Dad. Around a good word for you. I will, yeah.
Well, it'll be after Christmas now when this is going out there. Right. So I'll wish you a happy New Year, I suppose.
And the same to you, Tara, and to all my friends in Dundalk. And I have a soft spot in my heart for Dundalk always.
And you might give us a visit up at some point, maybe, would you?
I have been doing, and I will do again. That's for sure. Yes, yeah.
Well, I've no doubt our paths will cross again, Dara.
Well, I'd say, as long as I can stay alive long enough to meet you again.
Absolutely. All right. Well, stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for everything.
And so to everyone watching, hit subscribe for more fun and witchy adventures. I upload every Thursday. You're not going to want to miss it. Slán agus beannacht. Goodbye and good luck to you, and a happy new year to you too. If you want to hear more from Dara, his books, The Globalization of God and Legends in the Landscape, A Pocket Guide to Aran, are both available from the writings section of his website, www.daramolloy.com, link in the description below, as well as from the usual massive online retailers. His forthcoming book, Holy God, A Spirituality of Experience, as well as his wife Tessa's book, Young at Heart, Tools for Psychological Hygiene, are also available from Dara's website, as well as contact details if you wish to inquire about his services as an officiant. Happy New Year to all my fellow ditchlings. See you in 2022.